Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Steve Johnson. I want to welcome you all to today's webinar. I'm going to be covering the topic of not all must are irrational, kind of precision tools for demandingness within rational emotive behavioral therapy. So I'm going to be focusing on demandingness within rational emotive behavioral therapy. Let's kick into the presentation itself. Before I do that, I do want to thank all my supporters. Thank you so much for hanging in there, responding to all of the things that we produce, and for financially supporting this so that we can do ongoing work that is, I think, really, really important for the development of psychotherapy. So let's get started on this. And so let me just say that this is an advanced workshop. It does assume that you have some basic knowledge about rational emotive behavior therapy, that maybe not an advanced knowledge, but that you have been exposed to the model and maybe even practiced it a little bit. But I'm taking it, especially in the concept of demandingness, kind of to the next level to overcome potential rigidity in the understanding and use of that within your REBT psychotherapy. Let me make it really clear that this is not a revision of REBT, but kind of a refinement that those who have been practicing for some time are aware of, or maybe we've drifted away from it, but it is really important to understand that. But we're sticking with the basic REBT model. We're just refining that. So today will be about the precision or the precise use of REBT with respect to demandingness. Okay, why this matters, and I think this matters greatly. Demandingness, the must, the shoulds, the oughts, the have-tos and needs typically is really the core belief within REBT. But when we say that a must in the form of, just the word itself is dysfunctional or irrational, that's too blunt. Albert Ellis never said that, but some individuals who haven't dug deeply within REBT kind of become word police and then just jump on that must or should or that ought or have to or need, and then they were ready to dispute that, which is never been the case within REBT. Demandingness is central. That is absolutely. Demandingness is central within REBT. But it's often taught way too bluntly. And I want to move away from that today because that can create problems in the practice of REBT. If you jump upon those words, if your focus is on the words, you may be disputing something that is not irrational, and that can confuse the client and kind of degrade the therapy and make it less effective in helping the clients. Okay, so let's dig a little more deeply and look at what I would call the REBT anchors. The core of rational emotive behavioral therapy is this ABC model. And if you haven't been exposed to it, I'm just going to mention it very briefly and then I'll move on. The ABC model, each of those letters stands for something important. The A stands for adversity. Sometimes in REBT, we call it an activating event. That is something that happened, an event or a situation, a state of affairs. And that could be an interaction with a person, institution, even with yourself. That is called the activating event. We refine that within REBT to talk about the critical activating event. That would be that part of the activating event or the adversity that the client may be disturbing themselves about and gives rise later through their beliefs to some dysfunctional emotions and behaviors. Let me jump the B to the C. C stands for consequences, and what REBT means by consequences are the emotions, behaviors, and even physiological responses that an individual has. Now, within the REBT model, we do not hold that A causes C. We have way too many studies that demonstrate that that is not how the brain necessarily functions, that events do not directly cause our our consequences, our emotions, behaviors, and even our physiological responses. What the REBT holds is that there's an intervening variable, and that is our beliefs. Those beliefs take two forms. One is an inference. An inference is just a cognition that attributes meaning to a situation. And then beliefs are those cognitions that don't attribute meaning, but assess or evaluate situations. So that ABC model is core. And what I'm talking about today is making no changes in that ABC model. Now, also remember that demandingness, which is the core irrational belief within REBT, or if you don't like the word irrational, think unhelpful, which is how I think about it. And so what do we want instead of demands? We really would prefer to help the clients move from demandingness to preferential language. I prefer, I wish, I want, I hope. And it doesn't mean those are weak. You can strongly prefer, really wish strongly too. It's not about the strength. It is about the nature, okay? That demandingness tends to lead to dysfunctional emotions and behaviors, whereas more preferential language does not set you up for those dysfunctional emotions and behaviors to a large degree. And then to that demandingness, in REBT, we talk about the derivatives. And the derivatives are beliefs. They are dysfunctional beliefs. They're not real helpful. They're unhelpful beliefs. And those would be awfulizing or catastrophizing, as often termed within our friends in CBT. Awfulizing, catastrophizing, or frustration intolerance. Some people call it I can't stand it-itis. That's when we go, this is too much, I can't stand it. Those kinds of beliefs typically very, very common and lead to high frustration and some frustration-based angers and anxiety. And so those tend not to be real helpful. And then to that, we have global negative rating. Global negative rating of what? Of the self, or of others, of the world, of life, or even global negative rating of our own thoughts. Oh, I shouldn't have been thinking that, etc. So global negative rating generally is dysfunctional too. In fact, global negative rating of the self often will contribute to depression. Global negative rating of others often will contribute to anger. Global negative rating of life sometimes can be quite concerning. Individuals could be depressed and suicidal if they see the world is just too much and they can't tolerate that. So that's the ABC model: demandingness versus preferential kinds of thoughts, and then those derivatives. Okay, we are not in this webinar trying to make any changes in that whatsoever. We're zeroing in on the demandingness and refining that for better REBT practice. Okay, I hope that is. I hope that's helpful. Now, you'll notice that I just posted on this slide that REBT already differentiates different kinds of demands and says that those demands are not unhelpful or irrational. Albert Ellis himself talked about certain types of demands that are not dysfunctional or irrational or unhelpful. One of those would be moral demands. Another one would be legal demands or practical demands. If you're a student, a practical demand might be, if I want to get a good grade, then I probably ought to study, right? Or a moral demand. If I want to be moral, then I probably should not steal property from another person. Or legal demand. If I want to be within the law, then I probably should not drive above 25 miles an hour within a 25 mile an hour zone, right? So those demands, moral, legal, and practical, have never been seen within REBT as dysfunctional. So we would never go after those, okay? We would never try to dispute that kind of a belief. What is problematical, and REBT has always held this, would be metaphysical demands. Now, what do we mean by metaphysical demand? We mean those demands that are about reality, that something absolutely has to be the way we want it. Well, that doesn't really make sense. And when we have that demand and reality doesn't follow from that demand, then we have set ourselves up for emotional, behavioral, mental kind of disturbance, right? We're contributing to our disturbance by that demand that reality must be a particular way. People must be moral. Nope, they have an option. People absolutely have to appreciate my work. No, they don't. People have free will, right? So that kind of metaphysical demand that reality has to be a particular way is always been seen as dysfunctional. If you have questions about that at the end, we can entertain those questions. So feel free to make comments, and then at the end, I will come and try to answer any of those comments that you have. If I can't answer it, then maybe I can point you even in the right direction. So let me summarize this. These are the anchors, right? And ABC is staying intact. We're doing preferences versus demands, still matter, and derivatives still follow the demandingness. And REBT never said that all demands are irrational. As I've said, Ellis distinguished different types. The problem are those metaphysical demands. Okay, so let's move to another focus. What is the problem that we get into if we just, as soon as we see that should, ought, must, have to, need, how do we get in trouble? That is an oversimplification of the model, and the model has never been that way, right? So it's not even adherence to REBT as it actually is. It's when people oversimplify it. And believe me, I understand, especially I remember back to my graduate school days and when I was learning psychotherapy, etc. I wanted it to be as simple as possible, kind of wanted a toolbox, and I would just pull out interventions. And yeah, I understand that, but that just doesn't lead to good psychotherapy. We want to shift from just a toolbox to exercising judgment, informed judgment, okay? So when we focus only on the word must, we miss something tremendously important, right? And that is the function of that word rather than the word itself. So if we become like policing the word and we don't try to get at its function that the client is trying to communicate or what they're trying to think, right? Then we miss it, because if it's the function that matters, not the word. Let me say that again. That is tremendously important, especially in new therapists or people who are just starting REBT. We don't want them jumping on the word. You were demanding. Wait a minute. They said a word. Now it is your job as the therapist to engage with the client, ask questions so you determine how that word is functioning in what they're saying and saying and thinking. Okay, that leads to mechanical disputation if we don't do that. So, how can we distinguish functional demands that we don't need to dispute with dysfunctional demands that we do need to dispute? Well, we've already mentioned moral demands, legal demands, practical demands. Those are functional demands, and we'll see why in a minute. The metaphysical demand is the one that we do want to dispute. So let's look at functional demands. One thing that we notice is that a functional demand always has what we call a conditional structure. A conditional in logic is if-then. I already stated some of that. If I want to be moral, then I should not steal. You see, that moral demand has an if-then structure. What about legal? If I want to be within the law, then I should not drive above 25 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone, right? An if-then structure. Practical demand. If I want to get a good grade in the course, then I probably should study. That's an if-then. That's a practical demand. Those are rational, those are functional, and we wouldn't want to waste our time disputing them because there's no problem there whatsoever, right? And so those have instrumental necessity. That is fine. Notice also that they're action-based. If I want to be moral, then I probably should not steal is about an action, right? If I want to be within the law, then I should, okay, that's about an action. If I want to get a good grade in a course or be successful on the job, then I should, and then that leads to practical action. So what is functional here is it has an if-then structure, it has instrumental necessity, and it's action-based, okay? So it has the structure, if I want X, then I must do Y. If I want X, then I must do Y. If it can't take that structure, it would be dysfunctional rather than functional, okay? So that's an easy way to do it. That's instrumental. It's not metaphysical. We're not demanding that reality has to be a particular way, or it has to be the way that I want it to be, okay? It has instrumental value, but not metaphysical value if it's a functional demand, okay? Let's dig a little more deeply here. Dysfunctional demands are unconditional. They do not have an if-then form. You absolutely must always appreciate what I do for you. There's no if-then. There's no if-then at all. It's absolute. So dysfunctional demands are absolute demands that cannot be put in if-then form. We're going to dig into that a little more deeply a little later. These tend to be directed about reality. Reality has to be the way I want it to be, right? Not practicality, but about reality. And it's ego binding. It is like, the world has to be a particular way. Why? I want it. Therefore, it has to be that way. Okay. That can be quite problematical. So metaphysical demands remove the if. They do not have an if-then structure. That's one way to make this simpler. They make claims about reality itself. That's where the disturbance comes from. When we make demands about reality and how it should be, that's where we disturb ourselves. Demands about what? The self, about others, life, and the world. I must always be successful, okay? That's a metaphysical demand. You must love me in the way that I want you to love me. That's a metaphysical demand. Those will set us up for emotional and mental, emotional, behavioral disturbance. Okay, let's dig even more deeply. Is there an if? Is the choice preserved? First diagnostic question that we ask ourselves as clinician. Is there an if there? Right? Go look at that. Can this belief be stated as an if-then. The big question you should ask yourself as a clinician. If not, it's already suspect. It's already suspect because it's most likely an absolute demand about reality. Okay? So that's the if-then test. Keep that in your mind. If you're wanting to sort out which demand we need to dispute, which ones we don't need to dispute, you do an if-then test. If it can be put into if-then form, don't dispute it. Leave it alone. It's fine. Okay? Let's move on. There are, however, and these can be a little bit tricky and we need to think about them, but they're not that tricky. These are what I call disguised demands. We put them, and clients put them in if-then form, but they're really absolute demands that we are putting in if-then form. So, but we can disguise this, but there's a way to identify that. We use conditional language, if-then language, but we're sneaking in a metaphysical demand. Yeah. How can we think about this? Okay. Some demands pass grammatically, but they don't pass in other ways. Okay. They pass grammatically, but they fail conceptually. No, that sounds abstract. So we'll take some examples later. They are disguised metaphysical demands that look like conditional demands. Let's dig into that a little bit more, okay? And so here is the second test that will sort that out for you. The first test is the if-then test. The second test is the possibility test. Possible versus impossible. Think possible versus impossible. Action-oriented versus some kind of internal state. So if it's possible, it's functional. If it's impossible, it's dysfunctional. If it's action, it is functional. If it's about an internal state, it will be dysfunctional. Okay. That may seem a bit abstract, but think right now, we've had one test, the if-then test, and now we've come up with the second test, the possibility test. So the second question is the then clause. Look at what comes after the word then, okay? We've got this if-then structure, but always look at what's in that then clause, whatever follows the then, okay? Look at that. Is it possible? Is it possible? Whatever follows that is possible. If I want to pass my exam, then I absolutely have to know everything perfectly. Well, that's impossible. That's impossible to know everything perfectly, okay? So we put it in an if-then form. It's grammatically in an if-then. It's put in the form of a conditional. But when we look at what's after the then, it's impossible. It's impossible. So it is a disguised conditional, but it's still dysfunctional, okay? Or is it an action or an internal state? If I, and always ask about that, I must be perfect, right? Internal state rather than an action, okay? So let's dig into that because that may seem a little confusing, but after a while and just some practice, you'll see that you use those two tests and you'll have it really done really simply. Addiction, let me give some addiction examples because that may be pretty simple. Someone may say, because this is really clear, someone may say, recovery doesn't require purity, right? But we can become dysfunctional about an addiction if we go, I absolutely cannot have any cravings. If I want to do well, if I want to have sobriety, then I must not have any cravings. Or I can't have any cravings. We put it in if-then form, But is it possible never to have cravings? No, that's not realistic. We have no control over a craving necessarily. Or I should never crave. Well, that would be like me saying I should never crave cheesecake, okay? That's not happening, okay? But if I want to have sobriety, then I need to tolerate those cravings. Now, that makes sense. That makes sense. That is not absolute, and that may be possible. I can learn to tolerate the craving, but it's impossible to have no craving, and it's impossible to never have craving. But I can learn how to tolerate those cravings. Just because of a craving doesn't mean I'm going to die, okay? It'll feel bad. And so tolerating craving is not impossible. Wanting no craving, wanting never to have craving is impossible. So the first two would not pass that possible impossible test, okay? So because the tolerate cravings requires a tolerance of normal urges that individuals have. Okay, so think about individuals you know who have maybe a substance use disorder, or maybe they have a behavioral addiction, right? For example, one addiction, actually one of the most lethal addictions that people have, because there's a high death rate, is addiction to suntanning. Going to suntanning booths sometimes, way too much, can be very problematical for somebody, right? Or if shoplifting is a behavioral addiction. So you may have the urge, and if you go, I must never have the urge to shoplift, I must never even think about it, that's impossible. But tolerating it and realizing that there is something you can do about it, yeah, that's possible. That is absolutely possible. So that would test the possibility question, okay? So again, let's look at trauma and anxiety, because many of our clients that we have will have experienced trauma and anxiety. So if they say this absolutely should not have happened, that is an absolute one. And just the way the world is, yeah, bad things happen. That's the way things were. I should never have had that wreck. Well, you did. And it was a convergence of all kinds of things. Poor judgment, lapse of focus. You didn't have any control over how the other person drove. All of those kinds of things. So that it should absolutely not have happened doesn't even pass that test, the possibility test. I must always feel safe. That's impossible, to always feel safe. Wait a minute. You mean that if there is a huge threat in the environment, you absolutely must feel safe? That's kind of impossible. However, you go, if we can help someone who's experienced trauma and anxiety to tolerate, I want to tolerate distress, right? If I want to get better, then I need to tolerate distress. That is not absolute. That passes the possibility test, because you can learn to tolerate distress. You can't change the way the world is and change reality so that if something happened, that it shouldn't have happened. It did happen, right? Etc. So I hope that is a little bit helpful when we put it in the context of actual treatments. Okay, let's look at that. So the same logic applies to trauma that applied to what we looked at before. Okay, the problem is not the pain. The problem is not the pain. It's the problem is your demand about reality or safety. When you demand absolute, that reality must be the way that it was, even if it's past. Some people go make a demand about a reality that is in the past, which doesn't really make sense. It's normal, it's human, but it's not helpful. Or demanding absolute safety. We don't get that guarantee, okay? That's not the way the world is. That's not realistic. Okay, so think about instances that you know about there, okay? So let's look at precision disputation. So remember, in REBT, we have the A, B, C model. Once we get the B's, which would be those, and if they're fine, we don't deal with the beliefs that are, helping individuals reach their desired life goals. Leave those alone. But if they have demands that are getting in the way, or any kind of irrational, unhelpful belief that are getting in the way of them attaining their desired life goals or causing deep, deep emotional pain, then the next letter in the sequence is D, and that's disputation, especially within REBT. That's where we help. We don't attack the individual, the client. We look at their belief, and together with the client, we look at whether that belief is helping them get what they want out of life or not, or whatever, help them reach their goals or not. And so if it's not, then we will challenge those by asking things like, how helpful is it? Is there any evidence that proves that the unhelpful belief is accurate? Is there any logical principle that supports that belief? But here's a thing, what to remember here. We are not disputing their values. In REBT, we're not saying to the client, you have bad values. Okay? We won't dispute those values. Now, I may not like their values, right, as a therapist, but they can hold whatever values they want. I'm not disputing their commitment to something, not at all. What I'm disputing is a belief that is impossible and absolute. Impossible and absolute. It cannot be put in an if-then form, which would be functional, unless it's one of those disguised ones that slips in an absolute. Okay? That's precision disputation. Leave their values alone. Leave their commitments alone. But if they're disputing metaphysics, how reality should be, because they want it to be that way, now we'll help them see the dysfunctionality of doing that, and how that can get in the way of sobriety, how that can get in the way of overcoming trauma, how that can get in the way of treating anxiety, how it can get in the way of relationships, all of those kinds of things when we have those metaphysical, when metaphysical necessity is seen there, okay? Okay. So let's just hammer that a little bit and clarify. We are not disputing values. I can't say that enough. We are not disputing the client's values. We don't say you should take on another value. In fact, that's rather unethical to do that. We're not disputing their commitment. We are disputing metaphysical necessity, because that will get in the way of their progress. Clinical benefits. The clinical benefits of distinguishing between the helpful, kind of helpful demand, the moral, logical, practical ones are quite helpful. If a client believes, I absolutely should not have to study to do well, that goes against reality. That is unhelpful. If they go, say, I absolutely must get an A, right? Or I'm a failure, that really makes no sense at all. Now, I hope that I do really well. I hope to get an A. Yeah, that makes sense, because it's not a demand, it's a preference. You see the difference? So what happens is, if we can help the client distinguish those two types of demands, then we can see shame decrease, better persistence to get meet their goals, and it's clearer, more effective rational emotive behavioral therapy use. If you just go after the word rather than the meaning of the word, then honestly, that's very sloppy REBT, because it is the meaning that a client gives to something. If they're giving it a meaning that is impossible to achieve in action, that is highly, highly unhelpful. Okay, so I can't say this It's going to reduce shame. It's going to help them improve persistence. Because in REBT, we don't focus on just changing ideas. We don't focus on changing situations initially. We will help them change situations. And one of the ways to do that is quit being so demanding. Because when you're demanding, you upset yourself. What we want is, I want to change that situation. Okay, fine. Now let's take steps to learn how to do that, right? But when you have a strong preference, that makes that easier than when you're really, really demanding. And so this actually strengthens fidelity to REBT when you make this distinction between the helpful and the unhelpful demandingness, okay? So a couple of more slides, and then I'll look to see if anybody has posed to me any questions in the comments or comments within the comments. I want some to focus on key takeaways here. Not all must are a problem. If they're conditional, they're fine. What kinds of conditional demands are there? Well, moral, legal, practical, those are very common, but it's the metaphysical ones that get in the way, as I say. Also, the ones that focus on possible actions, those are fine. The ones that focus on impossible actions, right? Then, and impossible things that we can actually do anything about. For example, having somebody love us, we can't have control over that. But trying to act lovingly toward people, yeah, we can do that. It's up to them whether they love us, etc. So key takeaway is, not all musts are dysfunctional. Do that if-then test and also the possibility test, and that will help you. Look, like anything, this is going to take some practice. It's going to take some practice, but you'll look back on it and go, that was so helpful because it narrowed down what I need to work on with that particular client. Not only with your client, but you and me. Yeah, when we engage in that kind of thinking, because we're not immune from that either. Okay, so summarize. Here's the framework to hold on to. Is how I see it right now. Not all musts are irrational. Metaphysical ones are. Functional ones require possible action. Action has to be possible. If it's not possible, then it's not helpful at all. Okay. So if this, let's say you've been practicing REBT, and if this kind of created tension, or you're new, you go, oh man, this is a little bit complicated. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes really good sense. And in fact, that's good if it created some tension, because that tension you can work through by just practicing this and studying this a little bit more, asking questions of people who have been doing it for some time and have open minds and are actually practicing informed REBT. That would be really, really helpful. That means integration is happening, that you've shifted from an REBT interventions as a toolbox to informed decision-making, functional kinds of REBT. You've integrated that, and you're just moving along in a much more effective way. Okay, so I'm going to open that up, and let me check to see if there are any comments. None now. If anybody does have a comment, I'll wait a couple of minutes and see. If not, then I just want to thank all of you. Hope you found this helpful. And if you have friends that you know need to have learned from this, then you can let them know that this will be on my YouTube channel, Psychotherapy Education and Training, Psychotherapy Education and Training. And then you can, I hope it really helps you learn. I wish someone had given me this. Albert Ellis did, but I think when I first did it, I was just, when I'm learning it, then I had to just make my mistakes and then be open to it. But I hope this gives you some knowledge that if you practice, that will help. Let me see. There is a comment here. Let's see. Chair said that his manager shouldn't have oh, this is about an assignment. I'm not going to, this is an assignment that I gave, so it must be a student. I'm not going to give you the answer to that, especially if it's something that I haven't graded yet. So, but I love that they're thinking about that very, very thing. So if somebody believes that someone absolutely should not have done something, right? And what possibility is for you to actually change the reality so that person doesn't do it? There's no action there that you can control. So there's a potential problem there. So I hope that helps you without telling you what the answer is for that. Thank you guys so much. And if you have any questions and you go online to my channel, Psychotherapy, Education, and Training, then you can always message me there, and I try to stay on top of those as much as possible. Thank you guys for taking time out on a Saturday. I'm in South Carolina, and we're having snow like it reminds me of when I was in New York and Connecticut. So I'm going to go out and see whether I need to shovel. You guys have a great day, and I hope to see you at the next one, okay? All the best.